In the heart of Nigeria, among rolling hills and vast green fields, there stood an old boarding school that had served generations of students. It was a sprawling campus, its worn bricks and towering trees steeped in memories and mystery. Over the years, the school had seen its fair share of legends, but none were as terrifying, as unforgettable, as Madam Koi Koi. It was the story every student heard within their first few nights. Whispers would spread in hushed tones, often when the lights were out, and shadows stretched long across the dormitory walls. Those who had heard it before would huddle around the newcomers, eyes wide with excitement and a hint of fear, and begin to tell the story, each word hanging heavy in the quiet night. Many years ago, before the dormitories were renovated and the modern classrooms were built, Madam Koi Koi was a teacher at the school. She was known for her beauty, a striking woman with finely braided hair, radiant skin, and a style that was both elegant and unmistakably hers. Every day, she wore bright red lipstick and a dress that hugged her figure with sophistication. But what everyone noticed most was her shoes, dazzling red heels that clicked loudly as she walked. The students had nicknamed her Madam Koi Koi, after the distinctive sound her heels made with each step, koi, koi, koi. Her beauty and poise were matched only by her strictness. Madam Koi Koi expected excellence, and she accepted nothing less. But her dedication to discipline went beyond what most found reasonable. She was harsh, known for snapping at students over the slightest misstep, and had a notorious temper that few dared to cross. Students would tell each other to keep their heads down, to avoid her gaze, to stay out of her way. Her beauty was tempered by an icy demeanor that made even the boldest of students think twice. One unfortunate day, Madam Koi Koi's strictness crossed a line. She had been particularly upset with a young girl who'd accidentally torn her uniform. Madam Koi Koi humiliated her in front of the class, her voice like a whip that cut through the girl's pride. In a moment of fury, Madam Koi Koi did something unthinkable. She slapped the girl across the face, leaving a red mark on her cheek. The other students were horrified, and word of the incident quickly reached the school administration. The elders and staff couldn't ignore the students' pleas. That very week, Madam Koi Koi was dismissed, banished from the school she had once ruled over with such authority. As she left the campus, her red heels clicked loudly, echoing through the hallways one last time. "You will remember me," she said, her voice thick with rage. "You will remember the sound of my heels." Koi, 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 she walked out, her figure casting a long shadow that seemed to linger even after she was gone. Not long after her departure, word spread that Madam Koi Koi had died in a terrible accident. Some said she had fallen while walking down a steep path, others whispered that she had been struck by a vehicle. But whatever the cause, her death was the final chapter of her story, or so everyone thought. Several months passed, and the school returned to its routine. The memory of Madam Koi Koi slowly faded, her sharp voice and clicking heels becoming ghostly echoes in the minds of those who had known her. But just when everyone thought she was nothing more than a memory, strange things began to happen. It started with whispers. Students claimed to hear the unmistakable sound of heels clicking down the hallways at night. At first, it was dismissed as a prank, older students trying to scare the younger ones. But the sound persisted, sometimes faint and distant, other times loud and close, as if someone was walking just outside the dormitory door. One night, a group of brave students decided to investigate. They stayed up late, waiting in the dim light of their dorm room, clutching flashlights and holding their breath. The school was silent, the usual hum of voices and footsteps replaced by an eerie stillness. And then they heard it, koi, koi, koi. The sound echoed through the hallway, growing louder with each step. The students looked at each other, their faces pale, their hands shaking. "It's her," one of them whispered, barely audible. "It's Madam Koi Koi." They could hardly believe it, but the sound continued, moving steadily down the hall, closer and closer. Their curiosity quickly turned to terror as the footsteps stopped right outside their door. For a moment, everything was silent, the air heavy with dread. And then, as if on cue, the doorknob began to turn, slowly, creaking as if held by an invisible hand. The students scrambled back, their flashlights flickering as they stared at the door, waiting for it to swing open. But just as quickly as it had started, the sound vanished. The doorknob stilled, the footsteps retreated, and the hall fell silent once more. That night, they slept huddled together, too afraid to move, praying that Madame Koi Koi would not return. After that night, the rumors spread like wildfire. The older students warned the younger ones, telling them to stay in bed after lights out, to never wander the halls at night, and to avoid the old classrooms where Madame Koi Koi was said to have taught. Some claimed to have seen her ghostly figure in the mirrors of the bathrooms, a woman with red lipstick, dark eyes, and a menacing smile. Others swore they had seen her red heels shining in the moonlight, half hidden in the shadows. One night, a curious student named Chidi decided he would put the legend to the test. He was a skeptic, convinced that the stories were nothing more than old rumors meant to scare gullible students. Armed with a flashlight, he sneaked out of his dorm room, making his way through the dark, empty hallways. The school felt different at night, the silence almost tangible, the shadows deep and still. As he walked, he heard it, koi, koi, koi. The sound was faint at first, but it grew louder, coming from somewhere behind him. Chidi froze, his heart pounding, his mind racing. He tried to tell himself it was his imagination, but the sound continued, steady and unrelenting. Koi, koi, koi. Chidi turned slowly, his flashlight shaking as he shone it down the hallway. And there she was. Madame Koi Koi stood at the end of the hall, her red heels gleaming, her lips curled into a cold smile. Her eyes met his, and in that moment, Chidi knew the stories were true. He stumbled back, dropping his flashlight, his legs weak with terror. But the figure didn't move, she only stood there, watching, her presence as cold as the night air. From that night on, Chidi was never the same. He refused to speak of what he had seen, his once bold spirit dulled by the encounter. Other students tried to get him to tell his story, but he only shook his head, his eyes haunted, his words lost in the shadows. The legend of Madame Koi Koi became a warning for generations of students, a reminder of the teacher who had never truly left. They say her spirit still roams the school, her red heels clicking softly in the darkness, a ghostly echo of her unfulfilled desire for respect. To this day, if you listen closely on a quiet night, you might hear it, koi, koi, koi. The story of Madame Koi Koi is more than just a tale, it's a memory that haunts the hearts of those who once called that school home, a reminder that some spirits never rest, and that in the dead of night, the past has a way of walking beside us. If you ever find yourself in that school, remember this, respect the halls, honor the memories, and stay in bed once the lights go out. For Madame Koi Koi is still there, and she waits for those who would dare disturb her silence. And if you ever hear that familiar sound, koi, 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 know that you are not alone.